been a bit of a journey for myself over the last few years. Where did I start? I actually trained as like a geologist back in the day, at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, and travelled around the world doing mining projects, and realised I was literally blowing up my work every week, like literally, with explosives, and I don't know, I just wasn't creating anything. So that's where probably like 8, 9, 10 years ago now, I quit all that and went into software and started my own things. And we actually, one of the first things that popped off was an environmental education platform, actually, in New Zealand. We released that for Conservation Week, and over 4 years we had 50,000 kids do our environmental education project program for Conservation Week in New Zealand every year. And so that was like my first sort of foray into the education space, and like connecting with people and creating change. So that was pretty amazing. And then, yeah, the last few years, I started getting back into running after giving it up about 8, 9, 10 years ago, just through injury. And then I've been transitioning out of the software space and literally just using all of the tools that I'd used to support myself, whether that's through my movement, my running, my yoga, meditation, all of those things. And then eventually getting into ultras, I was like, oh, well, like these skills are like useful beyond just going for a run. I think some insights that I've had from people that I've connected with is like, it's pretty much like 50% of people run for mental health and 50% of people run for physical health, and you're in one of either two buckets or like both. And so that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. I think I've used running not so much as keeping me fit, because I always knew how to keep fit with rugby background and everything, but it was more closer to a meditation for me to do the long run, even though I didn't necessarily enjoy the long runs or think that I was a runner. It was just that it created space for me to be able to think, and coming back to work, I normally would have solved a problem on that run. So yeah, that's what I've been using it for.
When you say like you didn't usually like the long runs, or like what was it normally about that you wouldn't enjoy? Like what would that be?
Probably because I'm a ex-rugby player and everything normally hurts at some point. So
Yeah.
you know what I love is just going for a run. I don't even care how long I go for. It's just like, yeah, I've got 40 minutes or an hour.
Yeah.
Let's just go do the trail back behind the house.
Yeah.
And then that's what I enjoy. I actually really enjoy it when it gets really, really hard, funnily
Yeah.
enough. But yeah, tell me more about your stuff then.
Yeah, so like I guess how I sort of got into it was I'd literally given up running about 10 years ago through injury. I had like a knee injury in my left knee, I had like bursitis, and I used to have this like fluid sac on it. You know, it had just been smashed through wakeboarding, surfing, football, all sorts of stuff, like skating, you name it. Slightly different to rugby, probably not as gnarly, but um, I'd like just took out all impact sports, or like what I thought was like impact sports at the time, and I was like, running, it's on the chopping block, got to get this knee fixed. And so then tried just every other modality under the sun to try and, I guess, what you could call heal it or fix it. And that led me on a journey through yoga and movement and understanding like how the body actually fundamentally works and moves with breath and technique. And I was on that journey for years, and then I'd actually been wearing Vivo Barefoot shoes for, I don't know, probably about 4 or 5 years. I started wearing them probably 4 or 5 years ago, just as like everyday shoes, because they were actually like, I used to have this like everything shoe philosophy where my like one pair of shoes would be like, you'd have to be able to wear it to the office, you'd have to go for a run, be able to go for the gym, and wear it to like a board meeting. I'd walk into a shop and be like, yo, I need an everything shoe. And they're like, huh? I'm like, that one's great, but the colors are shit. I can't wear that just like everywhere, and it doesn't work with everything. And the guys would look at me funny in like different shops. And then I used to wear like a pair of Adidas's, and they were good. And then I think they stopped making that model, and I was real gutted. And that's how I ended up with a pair of Vivos. And then I just got curious about moving and running again, and moving with like the most efficient way possible. And so just started to like test, like, could I run in like bare feet without shoes first, and just started building that back up, like really slowly, and then started getting a bit more curious. Ended up moving to Melbourne for work a few years ago, and then one day I was like, oh, I should probably like time myself and see how fast I'm going with my Vivos on, because I didn't really like time myself running like ever. Like as a kid growing up, you just run, right? Like you'd be like, oh, I'm going around this track or around the mount or up the mount or whatever. Like it wasn't really about, I've got my splits and I'm doing this like exercise routine, right? And I was like, whoa, I was like kind of doing like 5 minute Ks and that felt pretty effortless. I was like, oh, okay, like maybe this is like a thing. And so I ended up I found like a run club on like a Saturday morning. I ended up going along to that, and everyone was in there like super vapor boosty flies and like had all the gear on. I was like, oh, whoa, these guys are going to be like on. And I was like, huh, like I'm doing pretty all right here compared to like most of these people. Like, what's the difference? What's happening? And it's when I really started realizing that I'd like re-taught myself to run from the ground up. My breathing was completely different. My technique was completely different to everyone around me. And then some people in this crew were like, oh, we're going to do the UTA 50 Ultra in Australia. It's like in Sydney. And we're living in Melbourne at the time. I was like, oh, that sounds cool because I hate running around the streets. Would love to get out, in a similar way into like the hills or the mountains or explore the trails a bit more. Yeah, okay, I'll probably be keen, and like thought about it for a bit. And I was like, yeah, all right. I brought a ticket, and like we went for like maybe 2 trail runs together with this little crew and this little group, and then like everyone else pulled out. And I was like, oh, I'm still going to do it. So that was my intro to ultras. And yeah, did the UTF 50. Yeah.
Nice.
So
Was that 50K
that was
or
my
50
intro.
mile?
50K. So yeah.
Oh, nice one.
But
Brilliant.
that one's quite gnarly because it's got about 2,500 vert. So
did you do it in your Vivos?
Yep. Yeah. So
I've had mixed because I wear Vivos. I wear them for work and for just general day to day. But
yeah,
I've always had, when I try and go too far with my Vivos, I get really sore Achilles. So for the Ultra that I just did, I had to get a shoe with a slight raise.
Yep.
So I don't know if I've fully broken back into the Barefoot. It's probably years of punishment of wearing a rugby boot. So I think it's probably years of punishment of shortening my Achilles over that time.
It's like anything, right? Like come to improve something, it's like, oh, you might have 30 or 40 years of doing something this one other way. Like it's a long time that the body's like adapted to that shape or that technique or that like way of moving. Like if we want to like change or like make something different because that doesn't work for us anymore, or we're curious about another method, like I think everyone needs to realize that, yeah, like it will take time. It's like it's like going from like zero and being like, I'm gonna run an ultra, and you're like, have you run a half marathon before? It's like you should probably hit that milestone first and then look at doing an ultra.
Funny you should say that. I did the marathon without really training and then went straight to a 2-day ultra. So
nice.
Yeah, the other day I was just, the ultra dads were talking, and I hadn't done an ultra for a year or so, and I was like, I just got to do one. So I signed up for a 50 miler after 10 weeks and just showed them that you grit it out. Tell me a little bit about the breathing side just now.
Yeah, so in essence, like I was saying, like when I came back to running and then, joined a social run club and started running next to everyone else, I realized that after been doing yoga for about 10 years, my breathing had changed completely to nasal breathing, because that's just the way it's taught. And then when I started running again, well, that was just my natural adaptation. I didn't know anything different. That's just how my body runs on like autonomic systems now. And I was like, all these people around me, the most noticeable thing was just how loud people were. Like we're jogging along at 6 a.m, and they're just next to me, and I'm like, oh man, that person's having like a real bad time. It's like, it's noticeable. I'm just sort of slowly, rhythmically breathing in and out through my nose. And that's when I sort of was like, oh, well, oh, people aren't like me. What's going on? And that's when I started like looking into it more, and I was like, oh my goodness, there's like this explosion of conversations about breath, about nasal breathing, about, all of these different challenges that people are facing, whether it's poor sleep quality, all of these things that are often really connected to the breath. And that's when I was like, oh, okay, like people can't spend 10 years, you know, learning to breathe like I breathe. Is there anyone else out there that's figured out like a faster, shorter, sharper, better system to educate people through? And that's where I came across Patrick McCowan's work in the Oxygen Advantage and started training with them and understanding their methods, which are more, I'd say they're just more concise in terms of outcomes, because the outcomes between yoga is different to outcomes of like just pure sports performance breathing or just fixing your breathing while you're sleeping. And so that's when, I started exploring other frameworks and then blending that knowledge together essentially so that, you can retrain your breath within 1 to 3 months and have massive differences in your day to day, let alone in your sports performance or movement goals as well, right?
If I went down the 1 to 3 months of learning,
Yep.
what should the outcomes be?
There's the things that I found most fascinating was the data behind it, right? It was the science that's starting to evolve to back this up. One of the big ones is sleep. Heaps of people, we know that if in any sport, you would have known with your rugby career, like sleep is fundamental to recovery, and the quality of our sleep dictates the quality of our recovery. And so when we get a better night's sleep, we actually are just recharged better. We wake up, we're more engaged, we're more able to show up fully in that next day. And so some like really simple ones with sleep is if, for instance, your partner might complain that you snore or you wake up in the morning with a dry mouth, those are just two really simple indications that there's a high probability that your breathing isn't optimized for sleep and that there's a strong potential that you could really elevate your sleep quality so that your partner has a better night's sleep too, you have a better night's sleep too, and you've got more energy or the ability to recharge your body if you're training for an ultra or doing hard things for that next day. So that's one massive one that I was like, whoa, that's huge. And then the other one is essentially like, it's not, I don't believe like nasal breathing or not nasal breathing. There's obviously a transition. And when we just look at the definition of the nose, even if you Google it, it's like, what is the purpose of the nose in the human body? And it's like the purpose of the nose is to warm, humidify, and filtrate air. And those three things are very clear. The mouth doesn't have little hairs on it to filter air, and it doesn't have a system to humidify, warm, cool, or maintain thermoregulation essentially of the air going in and out of the hole, even though it seems like I need to breathe more if I'm getting really puffed. So a big one there is that when I started moving into ultras and understanding more about the breath, there's like studies that show there's like anywhere from 30 to 40% less moisture loss through breathing through your nose. And so if you're going long, that's like a massive amount of fluid. And, if you've got a vest on, you can't, I don't want to be carrying like 2 liters in the back and two like boobies of half a liter. Like going light enables you to go further. And I think that's a massive benefit. And some people that I've trained, one of the guys, Ara, he's like, man, I used to stop at every single water fountain. And he was trying to like just run a half marathon at that time. He's like, I just couldn't keep going without, having to stop, pull over, grab a drink, carry on. Now he's just like, I don't need to do that anymore. He's been able to, maintain that moisture content in his body, so he's just more efficient. So those are two, I guess, really simple ones that I've noticed and others have noticed when they start looking at the principles and the mechanics of how they breathe.
I want to dive a little bit deeper into that, but I read a book. I can't remember when it was, years ago, and I remembered one thing from it, which was that some tribe somewhere used to be running long distances, and they'd carry in their mouth a single bit of water in their mouth and they'd hold it in their mouth as they're running these like long distances. And I was like, man, that's so interesting. Like, maybe I should do that. But so I tested it a few times. But my question is, when did we? This should be known, right? This should be vastly known. When did we lose this?
From my like research and insights that I've looked at, there's some fascinating studies around it. Like, there's people that are like addicted to understanding like how we breathe. There's people that are addicted to like understanding like jaw development, jaw shape. There's an amazing book by a set of Stanford researchers called Jaws, not in terms of the shark jaws, but actual physical jaws. And they it was a culmination. One was a bit of a breathing expert. One was like an orthodontist or a dentist, very interested in dental challenges in populations of societies. And a core thing that they found in their research was that the study of like orthodontics in the USA was where the primary of their research was. There's just been an explosion of kids needing braces. And what they found is this has culminated with the foods that we're eating. And so as humans have shifted to a softer, mushier diet, more processed foods, it's actually changed our like essentially biomechanical structure of the shape of our jaws and our teeth when we are young and then as we are evolving. And it just so happens that the shape of the jaw, the shape of the teeth directly informs the soft palate shape at the top of the nose and our ability to breathe up here. And so from this set of insights, I think it's probably quite interesting to observe that the foods we eat, how we eat, and how that is actually more connected to more systems than we just think has been shown to, I guess that question of when have we forgotten to breathe? Yeah, it's possibly to do with things like that. The other piece I'd say is just how we're living, right? It's all environmental stuff. So if we're more stressed out, we're more, you know, where what a lot of people exhibit is like what we call upper chest breathing, right? Whether they're running or they're just in their day and they're a bit stressed out, the breath starts to rise in the body and they get a bit stressed and a bit. This is really common. And so again, right, like the scenarios and the situations that we're living in these times where there's, external pressures, work pressures, family pressures, whatever those might be, people just switch off. And then, that's when these habits creep in, when really people just don't have the tools to understand, oh, if I actually close my mouth and extend the length of my exhale, it seems contrary to belief, but that will actually give my body more energy, more oxygen, more relaxation. It will harness the power of things like nasal nitric oxide in my nose to, dilate my blood vessels, to make me calmer, to get more oxygen and energy to my brain. The list goes on. So to summarize that, I'd say it's like the foods we're eating, the environments that we're putting ourselves in, and then like an awareness of tools, because like you say, they don't teach us this stuff at school. They definitely didn't teach me this in sports science. I don't know if they taught you this in rugby training, but it's pretty fundamental.
Yeah, I think there's been a bit of a shift towards better breathing in the last couple of years, for sure. And I know a few of the guys have been trying to optimize their sleep with nasal strips and even going as far as taping their mouth. I've tried that as well, but it's funny, when I was training for the marathon, I think we spoke about this before, I basically just tried to tell myself the more I breathed heavily through my nose and out, the more I was filling my body with fuel for the marathon. This was the first marathon I did, and I was like, actually, I'll just tell myself that, whether or not it's true or not. But I generally felt much better when I did it. And so tell me, what's one easy win, say to our audience that's listening, say a dad, what's one simple technique he can do to get a quick win? Maybe not completely rewire a system, but something he can do day to day.
So core thing there, right? Can you just remind me of what that specific, you were just mentioning something that helped you was when you're running your marathon was breathing in through your nose and then what?
Yeah, so I was just breathing really heavily in through my mouth, in through my nose, and then
Yeah.
heavily long out through my mouth.
Yeah, cool. So the core thing there, right? Core thing that's a win for people. So what we've got to understand is that our lungs are essentially these fluid sacs, right? And the blood has to mix at the cell wall with the air to get that into it. Now, if you think about gravity, right? Gravity always acts downward on the body and all of the objects, right? As we're running, as we're doing anything. The volume of blood in our lungs is also forced down, right? So just like a cup with water in it, most of the blood will be at the bottom and less of the blood will be at the top, okay? What I think is possibly happening in what you've described as your example, right? Whether you're mouth breathing or nasal breathing or whatever, it doesn't matter. 2 big, strong inhales, you're increasing the pressure in this vessel of the lung, right? And so by increasing that pressure, we call that the intra-abdominal pressure. So the pressure between your abdomen and your lungs, essentially, when that increases, it encourages this blood that's under gravity to disperse more evenly throughout the lungs. And so when we increase that intra-abdominal pressure and maintain that, essentially it enables us to exchange gas in our lungs more efficiently. So that's why when we nasal breathe, we go, oh, but our 2 holes in our nose are smaller than our mouth. I need more air in, I need to breathe through my mouth. Actually, if we breathe in through our mouth and it's really wide, right, it's low pressure air on those lungs. If we breathe through our nose, that's high pressure and increases that gas exchange capacity. But if you're also a mouth breather, if you just reduce the area that you breathe in through that mouth, that'll also increase the pressure in the lungs. And so that will help with that exchange capacity, right? So think about it as the principle of the effect more than the hole that you're breathing through, as important to increase that lung pressure so that the blood pressure can increase so that you can then exchange the air with the blood more efficiently. The studies show by doing that, essentially it improves oxygen exchange capacity by about 10% in the body, which is like huge. Like if you go and buy the latest pair of Vaporflies, it's like a 6.8% improvement in your time. They say, well, if you just change your breathing for free, there's a 10% gain in your oxygen exchange capacity in your body. That's a pretty good win.
So a lot of dads that might be listening don't get a lot of good sleep and interrupted sleep. Okay, what's one thing we can do? Is it the same principle before bed, or are we doing something different to help our sleep?
Yeah, so look, core things with sleep, right? You've mentioned you've experimented with mouth taping, right? That's a couple of things. One, I think it's a fantastic tool if you are experiencing, signs of, hey, you're snoring, hey, waking up with a dry mouth. If you do experiment with mouth tape, what I would strongly encourage people to do is practice just wearing the mouth tape for like 1 hour at night whilst doing the dishes, or an hour before bed for like a week beforehand, before then jumping on to just taping the mouth at night and hoping and holding on that you'll be fine, because obviously there's a little bit of a transition to thinking about that autonomic response into that change. Some core other things that you can do: make sure that you've got like a fresh circulation of air moving in the room, and so if that's just like a window slightly cracked, that makes a massive difference, because it's actually, they've found cooler temperature is really important at sleep time for the body to turn on its autonomic recharge processes and systems. So that slightly cooler temperature and obviously the fresher air circulation is really important. I know that houses are amazing these days with double glazing and all sorts of things, but if your room's fully shut and you don't even heat it, just the body heat and temperature will like elevate that in the room, and it'll actually kick the body out of recovery mode. Personally, I know instantly if I've, I don't know, stay at a hotel or something or whatever it might be, and you can't, just open a window, or there's not the ability to have good airflow in there, I really struggle. And I wake up in the morning and go, oh, that wasn't as good as I normally feel. Yeah, crack a window, run the room a little bit cooler, experiment with mouth tape before going, full noise on it at night. The other one that you can do really simply is when, say 10 minutes before bed, is to really focus in, set aside 10 minutes. Obviously, no devices before bed. The blue light sends your brain into crazy mode. But the last thing that you can do that's a really simple one is 5 or 10 minutes, or even as you're just lying down in bed to go to sleep, is with your breath, focus on breathing in for 4 counts. So inhale for 4, 3, 2, 1, and then exhale for 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so by extending the length of the exhale, it turns on the parasympathetic nervous system in the body, which is our rest and digest. So our nervous system has 2 systems, 2 branches they've found. One branch is the fight or flight, right, or what they call the sympathetic, and one branch is rest and digest, which is the parasympathetic. So they've also proven that when you extend the length of that exhale, it turns on and signals to the body, hey, it's time for rest and digest. We're cooling the system down. Essentially, we're calming the system down. We're getting ready for recharge mode. And so you can essentially prime the body into that through inhaling for 4, exhaling for 6. Do that for 5 or 10 minutes before bed, or as you're going to sleep, just focus on extending that exhale, and your system will shut down much nicer.
Okay, I've experimented before with the 4, 7, 8. I saw that on a TED Talk once.
Yep.
Breathe in for 4 through the nose, hold for 7, breathe out for 8. And I mean, I do it occasionally before bed. I don't know whether actually I go off to sleep quicker or not. What have been some of the results, whether it be for yourself or some of your clients at the moment? What's the impact been on them?
I think one of the interesting things that I reflect on is running's like a vehicle that we have awareness through. We're consciously doing something hard, and I guess it exasperates all the things that are either in balance or out of balance in our body. And one of the big things I think people really notice is that the effects, go beyond just their running. It actually plays out into the rest of their life, their sleep or in their workplace. They might feel calmer throughout the day. One of the real cool one actually was one of the girls, Kate. She'd done a few sort of, I guess, sports in her time, a few sort of obstacle course endurance races and things like that. And then she wanted to do just a 33K with, it was maybe 1500 vert. Train the breath, train the technique, did the Ks, did the work. And then afterwards, she was actually reflecting one of her light bulb moments was, it wasn't until she actually just went to a park run, and one of her friends was from out of town. And she's like, oh, come along to park run. And her friend was a bit like, oh, I don't really like park run, but okay, I'll come along because it's something you're doing with me. And I'm a big proprietor of getting out for a social run. I think it's one of the number one things that people can do, whether you're training for something crazy or whatever. Ditch worrying about the performance. Just make sure you always do that social run every week. But what was fascinating was it was her. It was a reflection for her of who she used to be. And so she'd go to park run normally, and she'd just be struggling to sort of keep up, and people would be trying to talk to her, and she was really caught up in her breathing, and that restricted her ability to enjoy the run more or be able to socialize with other people. And then she was like, whoa, she's like, I realized that used to be me. And she's like, there I am, just running next to my mate, sort of talking away, tra-la-la-la-la, using some of the tools with my breath to get it back online once I've been talking too much or whatever. But that reflection for her and her friend was really struggling, and oh, something's changed in me beyond just this event I was training for or this specific run. It was those lasting ways of being. And I think I describe these tools as, life tools. They're not actually just a way to go faster or further in one run or one race that you want to do. And that's the thing that gets me really excited.
So you're currently coaching. Are you coaching in person? What does that look like?
Yep. So essentially, I've got a free school community, school.com/skeletal freedom. You can dive in there, get the foundational trainings for free around leveling up your breath, having awareness of how to breathe light, how to breathe slow, how to breathe deep. And then there's an amazing nose unblocking technique in there as well to really give you those just fundamental foundational understandings. And then if you're looking to go further with your breathing for your running, whether that's, half, marathon, ultras, we have the pro community. And in that pro community, there's deeper modules about more advanced breathing techniques for more specific contexts. And yeah, you can really level up your breath and really start mastering that. So the goal is not to need exercises and just be really autonomically understanding this is where I'm at, this is how I'm moving, here's a big hill. How do I recover really fast after that? All of that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Okay. What happens when you've got a rugby player like me that has had multiple nose breaks and I've had 6 facial cheekbone breaks? Does that have any impact on what I could achieve or results?
Woo! Big job. Fun fact, there's something like, I guess maybe like 80% of the population have what they call deviated septums. So the septum's like the middle channel, that sort of like splits the nose. And I think what's fascinating is a lot of people, it's not until they go and get a scan or something, they're like, oh, I've got a deviated septum. And it's like, yeah, you've been living with that your whole life. Like, you were fine. But it's now that I know that I have that thing, we might label it or say that I can or can't do something. So one is, yes, you might have had essentially lots of breaks and reconstructions and all of that sort of stuff in terms of the shape and how that might biomechanically look maybe, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can't train the principles. I'd encourage anyone to give anything a go that will mean that they avoid more surgery or going under the knife to try and better their body before having to use that as a last resort. And I think the medical system's amazing for, if you've just been I don't know what it was, a knee or a boot or a big bush on the nose and your cheekbones busted or whatever. Like, that's great to get things straightened out, but it's a bit disheartening. Even a friend of mine recently, his partner had some like nasal reconstructive surgery for like actual like challenges that she'd had for life with her nose, and they cleared all that out. But they just didn't give her any like tools of breathing exercises to shift that afterwards as well to support that. And so irrespective of how the challenges are with your nose, I think coming back to your earlier question of why don't they teach us this stuff? There's so much power in learning how to harness our nose and its superpowers that if we train through these techniques and you measure your progress, if you're not seeing progress, then definitely go see a medical practitioner and ask further questions about what's going on up there. But more often than not, we use what we call a BOLT score test, a body oxygen level test, which essentially is via pinching the nose and understanding when our tolerance for air hunger exhibits in the body. That test, when combined with regular breathing exercises, has been proven to increase your breathing capacity, irrespective of the shape of the nose, over a period of time. Yeah, I guess I'd encourage people to do everything they can before saying, oh, my nose has been smashed and bashed and crashed. I can't do those things, because in reality, you've still got 2 holes that go all the way to the back of your body, down into your lungs. It's still designed to warm, humidify, and filtrate that air. You've still got little hairs in there. You've still got so much space up in there to be utilizing the power of that nose.
Brilliant. So I'm not completely lost. I didn't look like this, by the way, before we started chatting. I had a couple of pretty good surgeons.
So good.
No,
I'm sure they did a good job.
yeah. I'm conscious that we're almost up to the hour, so I didn't want to keep you too long. But is there any sort of last calls to action, anything at all you'd like to ask of our listeners?
Yeah, sure. I suppose one of the biggest breakthroughs for me in my journey, I've always sort of had a natural movement philosophy and understanding how I can harness the natural powers or forms of my body. They say the number one limiting factor in sports performance is it's not how strong our muscles are. It's actually our oxygen uptake ability, and our blood is saturated with 98% oxygen at any one time. If you've got a fancy watch, you can measure your specific oxygen level, or if you've got a Garmin, it's a pulse oximeter. You can turn that on, you can do the test, and it'll tell you your blood is 95 to 98% saturated with oxygen at any one time. So the concept that is prevalent in society is when I'm puffed, I need to breathe more so that I can go further or do more of this activity, when really it's almost further from the truth. And so when we train our breathing correctly, we increase our body's tolerance for carbon dioxide, which releases more oxygen from our blood that is essentially oversaturated in oxygen already. So when I started looking at becoming the most efficient runner, to go further, to do things that I never thought I could do before, when I looked at those fundamental principles of one, breathing technique to give my cells and the muscles that I already have the greatest capacity for energy generation and recovery, that was a no-brainer for me. And then really looking at technique, I think that's the other big one that's really overlooked in our running. And that's a space that I'm slowly starting to develop more about, and there'll be content and modules coming on that soon. So yeah, if you feel like you just get too puffed when you want to go further, if you're struggling and stopping at every water fountain, or there's prevalent challenges with lower back pain, lower limbs, things like that, really just I'd encourage you to just start getting curious, start learning about the breath, start learning about like proper biomechanical technique for running, because anyone can show up and go and do training runs, but it's not, I often describe it, it's not the what, it's how we're doing it. And my goal is to be almost the laziest runner on the planet, and that I can go and do this forever. And like that's essentially like a sustainable way of being and living, in my own body and for my enjoyment of life. And so yeah, if that resonates with you, feel free to come check out some of my work, send me a message. You can find us, you can join the free community, school.com/skeletal freedom, and there's a ton of content. You can start leveling up your breathing, and I'm always happy to chat about running. So get curious and just understand like what are the biggest things that will shift the dial the most.
Nice one, brilliant. For those that are listening, also we have our own Ultra Day community. If you're not in it already and you're listening, feel free to join as well. It's also free, so lots of resources. Alex is in there, so he's happily adding value and lots of gold nuggets. So we'll put a couple of show notes, links and things to the schools. And if you want to join, feel free. And we look forward to chatting to you inside. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Nick.